I'm told that we are live streamed, so everybody behave themselves, please. Anyway, welcome all. It's a beautiful day. Thanks for coming. I'm seeing people from near and far and all the lakes and different places, so thank you for coming. I'm standing in for Julie, who would be welcoming you. She was unable to attend. My main reason for being here is to introduce Don Kretschmer, he who needs no description, and you can see his bio in the program. If you don't have a program, grab one now. I also wanted to introduce a new brochure, How to Be Wake Wise. And this is something desperately needed throughout the state, so we're going to be circulating it, and you'll see more of it. Anyway, we have a great bunch. It's all in the program. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Don, and Don's in charge of your morning. And thanks for being here. We are really appreciative of all your support, and enjoy the summer weather.
Well, thank you, Ann, for those kind words. I hope to live up to the hype. One piece of housekeeping. If everyone can put their phones on mute, please, or airplane mode, or whatever your desired method of off is. Well, thanks everybody for coming out on the hottest day of the year, the hottest day since last year. We've learned a lot at these water summits over the years. This is the fourth one. I think things have grown as far as awareness and so forth. The first water summit, we talked a lot about local water issues. We talked a little bit about climate change with a professor from UNH. We learned a lot there. The second one was a little different. It was sort of focused on solutions and what we're doing at the watershed level and what people can do on their own individual lots. The third one was sort of the topic of the day, which was cyanobacteria. It was in response to several blooms around town. We had some experts come in and tell us about cyanobacteria, its causes, and so forth. And then, this one is a little bit different, but it's also in response to problems. We're going to have Russ Lanoy talking a little bit about gravel roads. And then we're going to have Ted Deers from New Hampshire DES talk about some of the state programs that are going on, in particular road salt and a few other things that the state has happening. So I think our charge for today, there's a lot of new faces, and as many of you, it's nice to see old faces, but there are new faces here, and there's new faces in town. We all have new neighbors, and by and large, that's a good thing. I think it's incumbent on those of us who've been around for a while to sort of pass the knowledge that we have about watershed management and protecting the lakes to the new folks. Because, as I've said in other forums here before, people choose to live here. This is a choice to come live in Wolfboro, and a big part of that choice is our abundant, high-quality water resources, in particular our lakes and streams. And protecting those is what we should all be about, and that's part of the reason we're here. So I would encourage you to take the information here, pass it along to your new neighbors. I know I have a new neighbor. I'll be sure to pass it along to him as well and his family. So from here, I'm going to have a few announcements at the break. If you have questions along the way here, can you please, I think everyone has index cards, and yes, no? Did we do that this time? Okay, we will. We'll pass those around, the index cards, and what we'd like you to do is write down the questions and pass them forward. We're going to have time for a few questions after the first two speakers. We'll have time for more questions after the break. So if you have questions, write them down, pass them forward. We'll sort them out during the break and make sure they all get answered. So without further ado, I'm going to try to keep things on time today so that we aren't kept past lunchtime and we have time to have our snacks. So our first speaker is Ted Deers. Ted is Assistant Director of the Water Division at New Hampshire Department of Environmental Resources. The Water Division is the largest of the units at New Hampshire DES, with nearly 300 employees and a current budget of $250 million. The division covers all things water, from lakes, rivers, groundwater, wetlands. In his 25 years at DES, Ted has served as the Watershed Management Bureau Administrator, Coastal Program Manager. He's passionate about water quality and the connections between environmental health and human well-being. I've sat in many, many meetings with Ted that he's either been moderating or been a participant. It's always been a positive experience. His idea of a perfect day would be a hike with a view, followed by kayaking in a secluded pond, and finishing with feet soaking in a babbling brook. A man, is well after my heart, because I like to do the exact same things. So without further ado, the name of Ted's talk is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly of Water Quality.
There we go. All right, can people hear me okay? All right, great. So I understand that I have no clicker, but I'm going to wave at my friend up in the belfry there, and we're just going to continue on. So, sir. So I'm going to take a little time today to take you on a little trip first to talk about water quality, talk a little bit about where we're at as a state. And then we're going to get into some of the subjects that I think you all are most interested in related to your own lakes. And it is fabulous to be here with you all amongst lake advocates. You are my people. Thank you, thank you, thank you for what you do. We don't do our jobs without you all doing what you're doing, whether it's Lake Host or it's VLAP or whatever other activities you're included in, your watershed planning. We can't do anything without the work that you're doing. The data that you collect, the weeds that you stop, that's the only reason why we're able to be successful, is because of folks like yourself. So let me just start there, and then we're going to launch in. So, yeah.
So you got to make sure you're talking into the mic.
Right into the mic. Ooh, the voice of God. All right. So I get asked a lot, so Ted, how's the water? Go ahead. And mostly good. We generally here in New Hampshire have good water quality, good to excellent water quality. And you can see through some of these graphs, this is a comparison between where New Hampshire is. This is dissolved oxygen relative to the national scene, relative to the regional scene, and we generally have good water quality in our lakes. And we have some really good trends in certain areas. This happens to be a graph talking about pH. And as you well know, we had acid rain and we still continue to have acid rain, but acid rain for a long time, which leached all the buffering capacity out of our lakes. And so what we're starting to see is after 30 years of air regulation, we're starting to see some of those numbers come back up. That's really a good sign. And if you look at the statewide, that's the graph up there, what you see is really chlorophyll, phosphorus, transparency have largely remained the same, have largely remained in really decent condition. These are numbers that would be enviable in other parts of the country. So yeah, mostly it's good. And some are getting better. I mean, these are some of the graphs from your own Lake Wentworth, and you see declining phosphorus, you see declining chlorophyll. These are really good signs. These are signs that, some of the things that we're doing are starting to become normal. You know what? You all are starting to become normal. And me too. Although I think there are some people that would beg to differ, probably my wife. But we're starting to see things like best management practices. These are no longer the absurd. These are the norm. They're part of everyday engineering. They're part of everyday development. It's what we do as a society. They're part of your ordinances. They are becoming expected. Not just the demand from the lunatic fringe. They are becoming the mainstream. And we got to continue that. That's what we got to continue. That's a good thing. So it's all good except where it ain't. And so talk a little bit about where it ain't. This is milfoil. This is exotic aquatic species. This is really scary stuff. You can see that graph going up pretty rapidly, and this year we have over 100 infestations around the state. And the other scary thing about that is we're starting to see multiple infestations. So that is multiple invaders within a particular water body. That complicates it very much because what might be, what might hinder one might help another. So this is really a challenge. It's going to be a challenge. Looking at where we compare to other places on total phosphorus. Compared to the nation, we look pretty good, but compared to the rest of the Appalachian Plateau region, we're getting a little dicey. Our phosphorus numbers are starting to creep up. And this is again, a snapshot from the last lake assessments. This is the one that scares the bejesus out of me. This is ice out. So this is ice out dates across time, and what you're seeing in this year, was down, here? Somewhere in a lot of our lakes across the state. This has major impacts on lake health, and I'll let Dawn wax poetic about that. I can barely spell limnology. So, but this has a whole cascade of effects from color, the sort of lake browning effect that you've probably heard about, where our lakes are getting darker because of just basically climate change. It causes things to start moving faster. Anybody else having a lot of allergy issues this year? I know I've been miserable. I take a COVID test like every day. Yes, I got it. No, it's just allergies. So you're seeing, that's the exact same response. We see that same kind of response in our lakes where the whole system starts to heat up, starts to move faster at different times. And I think your own data, proves that there are some real challenges. This is, I think the increasing phosphorus trend, a little bit of increased phosphorine trend, and certainly that dissolved color trend here in Crescent Lake. Again, we only know this because you all collect this data. So this is scary stuff. This is stuff that we do still need to work on, and I know you all are working hard on it. Go ahead. And this is, I think this is really the important piece here is that you guys have gone through and written watershed management plans. These are excerpts from your own plans. And what it's, I think, interesting showing is that when you start looking at how do we parse out this phosphorus problem, how do we parse out this cyanobacteria problem, we know that there's sort of erosion is a big deal. We know that this is coming off the land. There are previous land use practices. To a great extent, our water quality is a legacy of past practices, right? So whether it was, some lakes that have a ton of phosphorus in them because of the denuding of the forest to grow sheep back well over 100 years ago, 150 years ago, or whether it's the logging practices that occurred, or it was the development practices of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. All of that has gotten us to a certain point. And these are the kinds of factors that we have to address. We're going to talk about some other, my other pet peeve here in a little bit. But what you're seeing is that your own data is showing that, you need to make pretty dramatic reductions if you're going to try to hit phosphorus, and it really has to come from watershed runoff. That's really the source. It's not necessarily septic systems. That's a little bit. It's certainly, in this particular water bodies, isn't necessarily waterfowl. We see that in other places. Atmospheric deposition it comes from, and that just means you need to keep your forest as forest, right? The forest is very good at ameliorating the effects of phosphorus if it stays in forest. So that whole quarter of your TP, your quarter of your total phosphorus, how do you make sure that that's not a future legacy problem? By keeping forest in forest, land conservation. These all connect up. So you see some of these various different, road runoff, surface erosion, bare soil. Go ahead. This is what we see out in the world. It's kind of hard to see, but pretty much even in these kind of grainy pictures, you can see plumes of sediment going out into this lake and in that lake. And there's, from road erosion, there's an entire little stream that's completely 100% sedimented in. You're going to have a great presentation from Russ here in a second, but I just want to show you that the magnitude of this can be enormous. This happens to be Black Brook, but you can see from this the amount of sediment in tons from some of these. Again, these are just individual road crossings, individual sites. And you can see these range from, 2, 3, 4 tons per year. Tons per year, that sediment is laden with phosphorus. That's all going into whatever that receiving water is. So this is the challenge in front of us. And, this is where you're going to have a presentation here in just a little bit by Russ that's going to talk about some of these various issues. I stole these from an old slide, Russ. Hope you don't mind. So he's going to talk about this issue specifically, and I hope that this is going to be something that will be helpful for you all to hear, because it's critically important. These can be, even as you saw that slide of individual intersections, can be the source of tons and tons. And even if the phosphorus is a small component of that, it's a small component of a lot of material. Go ahead. And again, here's some of the things that have been done that we've seen and we've helped fund, and we have training on some of these things, where it's hard to see in here, but there's basically just stone check dams. This is not rocket science, right? This is just paying attention. Here's this is kind of a rain garden, gravel wetland that somebody's put in. And then up there, it's just a driveway. But what do they put in? They put in some simple check dams. If your driveway is as steep as that one, and you're not doing something like this, you're contributing to the problem. So these are really simple things that people can do and are doing across the state that's going to really help to improve water quality. It's going to help to change that legacy that we've created. But now let's move on to the super ugly. We talked about the good, we talked about the bad, we talked about the ugly. Now we're into the really ugly. We're talking about chlorides. So when people ask me what are the big issues that are facing our water bodies, of course there's things like PFAS, which has become a 4-letter word in this state. Yes, that is a very challenging problem, and it's very critical that we solve that to protect people's drinking water. We have other issues: lead, arsenic, there's nutrients, phosphorus. But when people ask me what's the issue for the next decade, it's chlorides. And this is, I think, one of the scariest plots that we have of all of the data that we've analyzed. This sort of innocuous little chart that is specific conductivity for all the rivers in the state. So this is every bit of conductivity data that we have going back 30 years in the state. This represents hundreds and hundreds of thousands of data points, this little curve. And what you're seeing is an almost doubling of specific conductivity within our rivers. So what's specific conductivity? It's simply how well the water conducts electricity, which is a function of all the crap in the water, basically. So it's all of the stuff in the water that helps it to conduct electricity. And the primary one, and we know this for sure because of our geology here in New Hampshire, we have the ionic strength, these ions that are in our water that can conduct electricity. We tend to have very low ionic strength waters because we're relatively acidic, we don't have limestone, we're all granite, and we also, killed our buffering capacity through acid rain. But what we're seeing is that this is increasing. So that increase is really coming from road salt. This is where this is coming from. And you look at a place like here, this is the Sewell's Falls Bridge in Concord, here in the state capital. And again, what we see is this same trend repeated. We see the same trend of approximately a doubling of our specific conductivity. Again, primarily related to the increased use of road salt over the last 30 years. Slide. Rick Skarenka knows this slide well. This is Merrimack Village District. This is some groundwater data. The red curve that you see there, that is one of their wells. This is well MVD3. This has now gotten so high that they had to take it offline. This means this is a drinking water well for the people of Merrimack that is now taken offline. It is defunct because of chlorides. This is not the first, and it won't be the last in the state that has had this problem. Developing a new municipal water supply well today, given all of the other conflicts and challenges, is a multi-million-dollar proposition. So this is a serious challenge. This is a very serious challenge to the health and well-being of our waters. It's not just rivers. It's not just groundwater. We're also starting to see it in our lakes. This is a slide from Lake Sunapee, generally considered to be one of the most pristine, I think, lakes in the state. And you can see the specific conductivity there, too, has just about doubled. Again, from a really low point, doubled to still a really low point. I think this is what's encouraging, and what should be encouraging to all of us is that because, yeah, Ted, most of our waters are good. We still have a lot of ways to go. We still have the opportunity to change that curve. Go ahead. Before it gets to look like this. This is Cobbett's Pond. If anybody has been to exit 3 on Interstate 93 to the Castleton. Everybody been to a wedding at the Castleton or anything? All right. This is down in Windham. And this is Cobbett's Pond. You can see there's a bit of highway around it. And that's what the specific conductivity in Cobbett's Pond has done. That line goes from a relatively high point to now a significantly high point that is flirting with actually violating water quality standards for a lake. This will be one of our first lakes, probably, which will violate our water quality standards, which means we consider it too toxic for fish. So what is the big deal about a little salt? So there's a lot of interesting things. When we talk about salt, we're just talking about the chlorides. If your doctor tells you to go on a low salt diet, it's not because of the chlorides, it's because of the sodium, right? Rock salt is sodium chloride. It's the sodium that affects you, and you can see that the criteria for human health is 250 milligrams per liter. For those of you who don't dabble in science every day, I always like to put this little slide up here just to sort of let people kind of visualize what's a milligram per liter. A milligram per liter is a parts per million. A part per million is about 4 drops in a 55-gallon barrel. I chose a really clean, beautiful barrel for this illustration. So this is small. You know, parts per million is pretty small, but its parts per million have a significant effect on wildlife. That is birds and animals that frequent the waters, aquatic organisms. Our standard is 230 milligrams per liter. That's a number that is now violated in probably 60 different water bodies around the state. We have impairments. These are impaired water bodies. That's what that means. You can see that plants, terrestrial and emergent, start to get affected at about 300 parts per million. Okay, these are parts per million. And aquatic plants. But I want to point this out. These standards don't take into effect mussels, zooplankton, macroinvertebrates. Our good friend Don will tell you a lot about the role of zooplankton in aquatic ecosystems in lakes. They are fundamental to the function of those systems. If we screw that up, it has a whole cascade of effects that can affect how phosphorus is processed. It can affect how cyanobacteria grow. It can affect all kinds of things within that body of water. He'll kick me if I go wrong here. But there's some other things that are sort of people don't always think of, and there's a growing body of research on this. One of these is this issue. Okay, this is a pretty simple illustration of salt water, right? Salt water you can float in, fresh water you can't. I'm not so good at floating anywhere. I kind of swim like a cinder block, but I'm probably better at it in salt water. So if you're thinking about what happens in the spring when we have all of that runoff, right? And it's laden with salt, and it's laden with phosphorus and sediments and anything else that's dissolved in the water, metals, whatever, and it's rushing off. If it's fresh water, if it's fresh water coming across, it's gonna basically mix. If it's salt water, right, it's gonna float out, and it's gonna float further out into the lake. It's gonna float in different directions. It's gonna go in a different flow regime than the normal freshwater mixing would occur. This, at some level, has an effect on how lakes then distribute those dissolved and small particulates throughout the lake system. There's some research that's gone on this in Wisconsin and New York and in Canada, which is starting to show, certainly in smaller water bodies, that this can have a major effect. The other thing that we tend to think of is we tend to think of phosphorus in a vacuum. We tend to think of chlorophyll. We tend to think of chlorides. But what happens when you have a chloride plus a low pH, plus low hardness, plus low dissolved oxygen? What does that mean for the bottom of the lake? What does that mean for the whole ecosystem as it moves through? The only reason I want to tell you this is because this is important, and it makes a difference at even in a lake like Lake Sunapee, and certainly in lakes like the beautiful ones that you all represent. And it's not just us weirdos who love lakes that should care about this, right? We know that salt is responsible for an enormous amount of damage to our infrastructure. Bridges. I can tell you that there's certain places that have, I have a friend who's working with Wegmans, the grocery store chain, and they calculate millions of dollars of damage to just their front door entry amongst all their stores because of the way that the salt has destroyed those doors on the way in. They are now highly motivated in a competitive business environment to try to do something about that. Certainly we see dead trees, we see that landscaping is expensive, right? And as we look at tourism coming into our state, we want to have a beautiful, welcoming environment filled with trees. I talked about wells, I talked about fish. One thing we don't talk about is what about limits of development? I talked about impaired waters, right? So if you have an impaired water and you want to go put in some large development and it requires federal permits, guess what they're going to look at? They're going to look at those impairments. This is what really stimulated a lot of the work on chlorides in this state, was because of impaired waters along Interstate 93 and the expansion of the highway. It basically launched some of the solutions that I'm going to talk about here because we had to do something in order for that project to move forward. So this is real stuff. This is not theoretical. And this is an old chart. This is just through 2000. My guess is that all those curves have gone up even more. But the area under this gray part is how salt use in the country changed just from 1945 to 2000. We're using lots and lots and lots and lots more salt. Go ahead. So, why? And New Hampshire, up here, New Hampshire was the first state in the nation to use sodium chloride on our highways. We were the first. Back in the 30s, we were the first. And there's great pictures at DOT with some poor schmuck in the back of a pickup truck or a truck shoveling salt on the highway as the truck is moving. That was the nature of the technology at the time. Obviously, the technology has changed a bit, and we now have industrialized this placement of toxic sodium chloride into our environment. And why? And I love this quote from Shakespeare, because of what we now expect. My friends, it is our God-given rights as Americans to go to Walmart under any condition whatsoever. Are we going to allow a little snow to get in the way? A little ice? Nonsensible shoes? No, we're Americans. It's expectation. What do we expect to be able to do when we want to do it? We expect black pavement immediately. This has become the nature. This is why you see the curve going up much faster than the addition of highway miles. The curve is expanding even though highway miles is not. And why? Because of expectation. Sidewalks should not crunch. Can we all say that together? Salt should not drift. Okay, so we have to repeat that to our neighbors, to our new neighbors. That is a picture from New Hampshire, up there. That's salt. There's not even any snow in that picture. This is a picture from my window at work. I blame Bob Varney. This should never happen. This is excess salt. This is way more salt than is needed to protect public safety. So what do we do about it? I'm going to talk about our Green Snow Pro program here in a second, but hiring people who know what they're doing is certainly helpful. And we'll talk about some of the downfalls that they face. But there's other ways to do this. Brine. People don't understand the physics, the basic physics of ice and salt. The purpose of salt is not to melt ice. I know, I just blew your mind, right? Okay, I'm going to say it again. The purpose of the use of sodium chloride on roads is not to melt the ice. The purpose of sodium chloride on our roads is to keep ice from adhering to the pavement so that you can plow it off. It's to retard the formation of ice. What you should be doing is mechanical removal. Now, ice storms happen, things like that happens, which certainly does make a difference, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But that is really the key, is to make sure that you understand the physics of all of that. Brine, and also the other thing about physics, is that salt doesn't work when it's just a chunk of rock. At that point, it's just a chunk of rock. It works when it gets into solution. So by using brine, it actually helps you to get that into solution faster, make it sure that you don't adhere the ice to the road. So where are other ways that we're seeing salt? Here's one of them. I don't know if Russ is going to talk about this or not, but the application of calcium chloride that helps to keep roads held together. That's something that we are seeing more and more and more of. I'm getting lots and lots of calls about this. Certainly water softeners. There's a picture of a water softener up there. And I know that what I'm hearing on lakes is that more and more people are putting in water softeners. And I don't entirely understand the reasons, but I just know that this is going on because I hear it. One person gets one, and then everybody likes their water, and so everybody gets one. But I want you to understand, and this is what you need to share with your neighbors. Every molecule of salt that you put onto your property, you put into your septic system, you put into your water system, it is conservative. It does not go away. Every molecule is going to the lake. If you drain to the lake. I don't know how else to say it. So we're all part of that problem. We hear about using sand instead of salt. That seems like a straightforward proposition, right? Except for those of us who've been around who know that sand carries phosphorus in it and clogs up our drains and does all kinds of other things. And what we see is that sand only works for traction. And so you end up putting more and more and more and more down, or you get to a point where you have to use salt, and then you just put tons of salt down. And then this question of alternatives, and I'm not going to get into that today because I only have a couple minutes left, but that's a key area of research. Next. Yes? It's calcium chloride. Calcium chloride has twice the chlorides as sodium chloride. Yeah, this is true. So if you do that, because if you look at the molecular, structure of calcium and chlorides, it takes 2 chlorides to match up with a calcium. It only takes 1 for sodium. So if you're putting down calcium chloride, you're using twice the chlorides. You may be using half the salt, but it may not make a difference. So we created this Green Snow Pro program to help train contractors. I encourage you, if you are hiring a contractor, please consider using a certified Green Snow Pro. They are trained in reductions, and what you need to do is let them do their job. You don't need as much salt as we think we do, and these folks are trained to do that. Go ahead, next one. You can keep going. Stop. So this is the whole part of the program. Use less salt, make more money. Keep public health the same, public safety the same, because we're using more salt than we need to. Improve your documentation so you don't get sued, and improve environmental quality. So I'm just going to finish with this. This is kind of where I started this conversation. We have to change the culture. And we have to go through these 5 stages of grief in order to do so. We have to stop denying that we have a problem. Yes, salt is really important in our economy. Yes, dang it, these environmentalists, they're telling us to do this, they're going to just destroy everything. But what if we just use a little bit less salt? Just a little tiny bit less salt. Would that make you happy? This is never going to work. But wait, maybe it will. That's what we got to do collectively as communities, is go through those phases. Or maybe we keep doing this a little bit more. That'd be nice. That's how they used to do roads. Should we get down to salt shaming? This has been done in other parts of the country where people send in pictures on social media and we shame those who are doing this sort of thing. Next one. This is actually how much salt you need on a sidewalk to do the job. It needs to be placed basically for a grain every 4 inches, chunk every 4 inches. I hope that in your programs, the Keep Winnie Blue program, your Lake-Minded programs, those of you who are involved in this, that this is the kind of thing that you start talking about. I encourage everyone to go look up Wisconsin Saltwise when you go home. This is a group that is doing phenomenal community outreach work on salt. I encourage you to build your own outreach materials. Make it your own. I see some of the brochures that you all are putting together are fantastic. You have the ability to do this kind of thing. And remember, it's not necessarily at this point that salt is the enemy. It's the overuse of salt that's the enemy. We estimate, and research has shown this, that we use about 50% more salt than we need to actually protect public safety. So let's get a handle on that first. Let's just work on oversalting. And what about the future? We're going to see standards start to go down because as we do research on things like mussels and phytoplankton, we understand better. What will hydrogen cars do? Do you know what hydrogen cars put out their tailpipe? Water. What is water going to do on a frozen road? I don't know. What about self-driving cars that just keep moving around and around and around, or park in certain places and then have to move? We don't know how that's going to affect it. Big box retail, as that goes away, is that going to change the amount of salt we need to use on our parking lots? How do we deal with that change? Climate change is the big deal. we're seeing more and more of our storms come as ice and rain as opposed to snow. And that does not bode well. It means we're going to have to get way better at figuring out how to deal with this, and maybe we need to attack that culture, the culture of salt, and how we're going to address it. And I just leave you with this. I say this to everybody I talk to. When it comes to cyanobacteria, we have one key word. If it looks gross, don't swim in it. Thank you all so much for all the work that you do. Keep it up.
Well, thank you, Ted. That was great. So if you have questions for Ted, write them on your cards. We're going to try to get to it after Russ's talk. And if you have questions for Russ as well, write them on your card. Pass them forward, or we'll have somebody pick them up. And we'll have plenty of time to answer them either after this session, or we're going to have both Russ and Ted available after the second session. So moving along here, we're going to go from salt to dirt, and we're going to have Russ Lanois come up and give us kind of an intro to a workshop that he's going to perform for local road agents and other interested folks who are in charge of maintaining camp roads. I'd encourage you to sign up during the break for that. I think that's going to be really informative. I went to it 15 or 20 years ago, and I learned an awful lot about gravel roads. So Russ Lanois is owner of Rural Home Technologies. He's author of the book A Ditch in Time, an owner's manual for those who live and travel on dirt and gravel roads. Russ has been a private contractor in the White Mountains in New Hampshire for over 50 years. He specializes in soil and water issues related to buildings and property in an environment with considerable frost, snowfall, and torrential thunderstorms. Sounds like where we live. So I'm going to leave it to Russ now, and we'll go from there. You want to give him that mic?
I'm going to trade you.
Lights on in this one. There we go. All right, yeah. This hat was sent to me by somebody who saw the Chronicle session on mud. It's been on Chronicle a couple of times during mud season, which has been extremely, I don't know how it's been down here, but it's been the worst we've ever had up in the mountains. I'm trying to distill a 3-hour session down into 7 minutes, so bear with me. Yeah, there you go. Anybody recognize this? Holderness seems to have a little fun with their road signs. There's this one that's on Squam. There's to the dump road, and then there's this dam road. Keep your eyes open for it as you go up 171, I guess. Now, it's common knowledge that dirt roads are better for the environment because they let more water back into the ground. That's pretty simple, isn't it? Okay, I'm going to start the demonstration here. This is, well, it started off as a cookie, but it became more like a casserole. What you see in this is ledge pack from Coleman's in Conway. I've spread a lot of this stuff. The folks at Squam wanted, oops, I can't do it. They wanted something that they would hold together on the road. They could ride bicycles, baby carriages, and walk barefoot on. This is not concrete. This is Coleman's 3/4-inch ledge pack, so called because it started life as blasted ledge, oops. Well, I'll get to it. And is what I use pretty much exclusively on our roads up in the mountains. Slide. Yep. All right. Now, this, believe it or not, is something that's the result of human nature. It's everybody driving in the same ruts. The water finds it and does its job. And slide. Eventually, you can end up with this. I hope we're not looking at roads like this today. So our goal is to try and keep the road from looking like this. And slide. Why paving is not always a good answer. Can you see that? That's pavement there with winter sand on it, but that's actually pavement that was totally destroyed. I think the paver went back and rectified it. All right, slide. That is the pit where this material comes from. It's actually a quarry. I can hear it from my house, and every once in a while the roads just travel on 113 is stopped because they're blasting. What I'm going to show you here is just how well water passes. I hope I don't make too much of a mess here in the town hall, but through this gravel. Okay, this yogurt container is from a client of mine who helped me turn his paved road on Squam back into a country lane. I went back after it was done and said, "Yep, did a good job, except you didn't put a crown on it." So now this demonstration, this cookie or casserole, whatever, is not quite as well compacted as most of the roads that I work on are because these trucks usually, it's what I help to use to compacting the roads as I'm working on them. I usually start at the beginning of the road so that as they're working their way in, they're compacting what I've already graded. A vibratory compactor is an ideal way to do it, but we don't always have that available. Slide. Now, a typical crown on a road, on a dirt road, whether it be minimal or even a reasonable crown, rounded crown, will typically result in potholes down the middle. If you've never noticed this, start paying attention, because once I finally realized this, that's where the potholes are, right down the middle of the road. It's because there's twice as much traffic there, because everybody crowds towards the middle of the road and puts one wheel right down the center. So this next slide is that's a road maintenance tool I discovered in Ossipee, I think, a few years ago. You recognize what it is? It's a proverbial bed spring with some rocks on it. And you can see, I think you can see the hitch out in the front of it. That's what was used to maintain that. That does a real good job destroying a crown, separate everything out. It doesn't work. Slide. This is the front runner that you would have seen on, no, this is a picture that Sam Evans Brown, who used to be with New Hampshire Public Radio, what he took when he did the session on mud season. Mud season seems to be a very favorite topic in New Hampshire in the spring, for good reason. And finally, what I'll show you here, I have a few of these books here that are for sale. This is online. I recommend you use it online because the pictures are all in color. I couldn't afford to do color pictures for all this, but if somebody, every once in a while, somebody wants one of these to be able to share it with a neighbor without having to look for it on TV, on the computer. So this is a result of my many years of working dirt roads in New Hampshire. Oh, I forgot the hard hat. Yeah, I'm in imminent danger here. Okay, there we go. Now I'm in character. So I recommend you use that. Pass it along to folks. There's a lot of good information in there. I addressed the use of calcium chloride for stabilizing dirt roads rather than sodium chloride. Apparently this calcium chloride stays pretty well locked into the soil, where sodium chloride, I think, goes into suspension or solution, whichever. Chemistry was not my strong subject, and goes away into the water. Calcium chloride is used on roads when the temperature gets extremely cold, and sodium chloride ceases to work. So we want to show you here. I need my helper again. Where'd he go? Where'd he go? Yeah. You feel rugged? If we could just lift this thing up. Oh, by the way, there is a pothole here in the middle. And if you look closely, you'll notice that this side is a little higher than this side. Anybody know why that is? Can you tell what the direction of traffic was on this? That direction. The soil gets pushed up and comes out on the down road side of the pothole. Look for it. You'll notice it. Not in every case, but in a lot of cases. If the traffic's going both ways, all bets are off with this. You feel rugged enough to lift that up and show the bottom? Any way you want. Pick it up by this. If it falls apart, it falls apart. No, we want to pick it up and tip. Show the bottom. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Show just how much water went through that. If you look closely, that's bone dry. The lesson here is a very important one. A gravel road, properly designed, properly built with the proper materials, will pass water, will keep water from going in just as well as pavement does. A dirt road, gravel road, unpaved road should not allow water into the ground. The three rules of all road maintenance is drainage, drainage, and drainage. This is one of the first rules. You get the water off, and you don't want to let it go. Actually, there's two rules here. One is getting the water off by the shape of the road, and the other is using proper materials so that water can't go through that and soften it up like it does in the spring. I'll be around. I guess we're going to be looking at a section of road here at the end of the session to see what might be able to be done. Did it look like that? Did it look like that second picture of a driveway, Asha? Not okay, good. Yeah.
We have a workshop on June 18th, which can help you learn more about how to repair your driveway, or if you're on a road committee for your neighborhood or whatever. You can take a lot away from that, and you can learn how to build a road that'll last several times longer than just putting down sand or regular gravel. So Russ is going to help with that. Please sign up on June 18th if you would. We'll contact you, and hopefully you can make it.
Yeah, what I've heard over the years is the biggest expense that most everybody has on their roads and driveways is the cost of gravel. And if you're going to spend the money on it, you want to make sure you're getting the right stuff and putting it down the right way. And there are several tricks, several things that we've learned over the years and how to keep the cost down on this and make this as effective as possible. So thank you very much. I'll see you all at the workshop on the 18th, right? 18th of June.
Well, thanks, Russ. That was great. So we learned a couple things this morning. We learned about road salt. We learned about some of the statewide trends in water quality. We learned about gravel roads, and it's a lot more complicated than just pouring additional material on every spring and wondering where the material went on that you put on last spring. And the answer, of course, is in the lake. And we also learned that Tom Arabka is a lot stronger than we thought. So anyway, I have a couple of So I don't know if we're going to do questions now. I think we're running a little bit behind, and I want to catch back up here. So I think we're going to hold the questions, still pass them forward. We're going to get to them for everybody after we do the next section. And the next section is going to be sort of your local resource agents. So the people associated with the various lake associations and Wolfboro Waters are going to tell you kind of what's happening in your watershed. A couple of kind of housekeeping things. Tomorrow there's a bird walk that leaves out of Fernald Station at 8 a.m. Sounds like that'll be a great event. Susan Goodwin over at the Lake Wentworth or the Wentworth Watershed table is looking for lake hosts, either paid or volunteer, your choice. She's looking for lake hosts for Mass Landing and the 3 Winnipesaukee launches. Go talk to her if you have interest in that. Sign up for the roads workshop. Anyone who has a gravel road, gravel driveway, is their local road agent for their little neighborhood association. All those people should go to that. If you're interested in how to make your property more lake friendly, go to either the Lake Wentworth Association or Lake Winnipesaukee Association table or the Wentworth Watershed table. We have information. Both of those have information on how to have somebody come out and help you make your property more lake friendly. The next section, like I said, are updates from local groups on what's going on in the watershed. I think at this point we're going to break for refreshments. Visit the tables. If you don't belong to one of these groups, ask yourself, why don't I belong to that? So I'd say, given the price of gas right now, skip that trip to Foxwoods. For less than the cost of gas for that, you can join one of the lake associations or join them all. I think it's a really important thing, and it keeps the events like this happening, and it keeps the message out there. So thanks, folks. We're going to reconvene at 10. We're going to go to 10:30. We'll reconvene. We're going to be a little bit ahead of schedule, but we skipped the question section now. So 10:30, we're going to reconvene.
species from spreading from water body to water body. Could we have the next slide, please? Is the Lake Coast program. So you can see that well over 400 hours are devoted with volunteers and paid members at Mass Landing, making sure that invasive species don't go into the water or come out of the water on the boats and trailers. In addition to the Lake Coast program, the aquatic invasive species, we have other monitoring and removal teams that work as well. Next slide. We have our weed watchers and we have the dive team. So the weed watchers, will go along all the various shores and report any strange or potentially invasive weeds that they spot. And the dive team is faithfully out there virtually every week in the summer, evaluating reports from the weed watchers, but also revisiting many of the areas where we've had milfoil in the past, and doing a fantastic job of keeping that under control. So again, moving along to other areas, water quality monitoring. Next slide. For water quality monitoring, we participate here through the Lay Lakes Monitoring Program, and this is coordinated through New Hampshire Extension down in University of New Hampshire in Durham, where the lab is. And basically, throughout the entire summer, there's weekly monitoring at 3 sample sites directly in Lake Wentworth, 1 in Crescent Lake, and we've actually added a new one in Sergeant's Pond this year, which is great. You also can see over on the left over there, we not only do out in the middle of the lake, but we actually sample a lot of the tributaries. We sample in 16 tributaries into our lakes here. Usually this is associated with large rain events, but the samples allow us to tell how much phosphorus is entering the lakes through each of the tributaries. Next slide. Another group that has trained and willing to visit you at your own properties is the Lake-Minded consultant group within the organization. And their visitors, they will visit your property and help property owners come up with solutions on their property to see that stormwater is infiltrated. So they've gone through a lot of options and training in that. So if you are interested in having your property evaluated from someone that's looked at a lot of alternatives, just call the office and they'll arrange for a group to visit you and give you some ideas. In addition to the sort of out on the lake and outside type of activities, the Wentworth Watershed Association has partnered with the Planning Board, the Town Planner, the Wolfboro Waters Committee, and helped to rewrite the stormwater regulations for commercial properties in Wolfboro. And these rewritten regulations were approved by the Board of Selectmen and now are actually incorporated as the town's regulations to help protect as further development goes on and with commercial business expansions, that they're done with stormwater regulations appropriate and in mind. Moving on to the next area that becomes a major effort for a lot of people here is the 319 grants. And this has been something we've been involved in for well over 10 years. And yeah, so the 319 grant, pretty well most of you are aware, that's federal money that's parceled out to the various states from the EPA. And here in New Hampshire, it's also coordinated through Department of Environmental Services. So groups over here, like the town, we partner with the town. And so the town and the WWA will put in applications for grants. And so Right now, we're just winding up this year on phase 4. So phase 1, that was 10 years, it's our 10th anniversary of participating in these programs, was to develop a plan. You don't do anything or get any of this money if you don't have a plan. So that was the first grant that we got back in 2010. And now we're just finishing up phase 4. Each phase, usually right now we're in what we call the construction phase. The original plan identified 108 sites around the lake where actual constructive work and what they call BMPs, best management practices, could be implemented to slow down or eliminate stormwater from running directly into the lake. So each of these construction grant now usually picks 1 or 2 of those sites, usually a small site coupled with a big site. So we're just finishing up this year. This is, Fern Ave is the small site that we're just finishing up. And the intention there was what you see in front of you, just to the left off the picture, about 30 feet away is the lake. So that whole area right there sort of catches all the water up behind the houses, that house up there. All the water off the high ground surrounding it all comes down every driveway. And any decent rainstorm, you get about a 50-foot diameter, swimming pool right in the middle of that picture. That was before. So it doesn't take much of a rainstorm to have that 50-foot puddle overflow and right across the beach and into the lake. And that's been going on for forever. So Dave Ford was out there one day walking with the road crew from that community, and he said, this is really bad. This area was identified, there was a priority list made in the watershed plan. This spot was, I think, number 23 or something like that to tackle, that it wouldn't take a ton of money, but a lot of benefit out of it for the lake. So we finally added that during phase 4. So next slide, please. So what was done is the engineering consultants that you hire as part of the process engineered a design alternative where they took 3 storm drains, and this is one of them being installed, over by the mailboxes that you saw in the photo. In these 3 storm drains, now all of the road and gravel in that area are all pitched into these 3 storm drains that are all interconnected. And each storm drain has a tremendous amount of current storage, static storage, stone, crushed stone underneath, as temporary storage for any rainstorms to let it gradually dissipate and get back into the soil in a slow process. And if there was a major, once in a 100-year storm, there is even an overflow from all 3 of those connected into a local wetland area. So it really we've seen already from the snow melt and from recent rainstorms that seems to be working so far, looking pretty good. The next one. And there's a little light, but that just shows sort of the finished grade. So all of the finished grades in the area were to pitch it into these 3 storm drains as well. Next slide. So, all right, this is just at the end of each BMP that's installed, we have to make part of the report back to DES as far as the progress and how much, in this case, TSS, total suspended solids, how much is expected per the models to be removed by doing the work that we just completed. And also it evaluates the amount of actual phosphorus that would be removed. So that's just the type of reporting that's done on each of these. So that's the one for Fern Ave. Shows 57 kilograms. That's like 120 pounds of total suspended solids. So That's a lot of stuff to keep out of the lake that also carries the phosphorus with it too. Next slide. Now this is the big one that you all are or will certainly be familiar with, is Camp Birchmont down at the end of the lake. You're all familiar with what the big beach was last summer, and for those of you that went out early, you know it doesn't look quite like that anymore. This was one of the major identified ones in the study to try and address, and the association and the town worked with Greg Pierce, who was highly cooperative, and what we did is had it redesigned to put in the effect of a perch beach. The problem was that the beach that you're all familiar with was just such a slope that Mother Nature and the kids playing in the sand just kept that sand working its way down right over the front wall and right into the lake. So, next slide, please. This is sort of a shot of the engineered design was to, instead of letting it slope all the way down into the beach, is to create, most of you are familiar with the term perched beach, where from the front wall it's flat now for about 15 to 20 feet. And then this additional wall is what the main part of the project consisted of. Allows you to have the sand flat, and then it'll continue as it did in the past to slope up. Any sand that comes down over this wall, you can grab with a bobcat and reposition it up top. So the amount that gets into the lake will really be minimal this way. So this has been a phenomenal improvement, for the water quality of the lake. And one of the things that was offered to them, and it was just as we negotiated with Greg Pierce, is as you're pouring the walls, you can put these forms in the walls, and it makes it simulate sort of a stone rock appearance. And Greg found that attractive or desirable. So as we were doing the new wall halfway up the beach, he thought it would be nice to do it to his old white wall up at the top. So when you see it now, that was his expense. That wasn't part of the grant money. He negotiated to have the same contractor put the same forms around the old wall. And so now when you look at it, you're going to see that same sort of poured gray stone effect. But the environmental impact on the lake is unbelievable. So I'm waiting to, I've seen it from the land during the middle of construction. I'm waiting to get out there and see it from the lakeside this summer. But there's a couple of sets of stairs that you can see there so that the campers, can access, from between the two levels quite easily. And there'll be, I think it's a roped barrier, so they're not going to, while they're playing, they're not going to fall off the wall because Okay, can you hear that? You want the other one? Okay. Okay, sorry. All right, so that wound up being the major one at Camp Birchmont. And again, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that there was a report on that one. Oh, this is some other work that was done beside the beach, and time's running short, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but let's say there was an equal amount of money spent in and around the parking lot in the beach area that you look at, as far as catching a lot of the water coming down the road from the campgrounds, et cetera. So, and then there's 435, so that's going on 1,000 pounds of total suspended solids that we're keeping out of the lake because that was accomplished now. So, All right, moving right along. Okay, so the few remaining, just the last couple of comments that she wanted me to cover with you is that this year we also hired a consulting engineering firm to come back, and Rich Massey and I drove around with them, and we visited all 108 sites that were originally listed in the original plan to update them. So we had the engineers look at, all right, what's been done, was it done properly, cross it off the list, and we added a few new ones. Our intention, now that this is the 10-year anniversary of our plan, is to basically do a major update and a major revision. So when they get back to us, they will have crossed off the ones that we've taken care of and just reprioritized all of the new sites so that now moving forward, we have a new fresh list to know what are the new sites that are going to give us the biggest bang for the buck. And other than that, she said just to focus on what the new focuses for water quality are, and we've seen them this morning with some of the discussions we've heard. Salinity monitoring, so the salt in the water, camp road maintenance to work to reduce salt applications on driveways, roads for residents, businesses, the town and the state. And other than that, she just wanted to ask if any of you were motivated by any of the stuff that you hear this morning and are not already. I know a lot of you in here are part of what I've been talking about, the volunteer group. But if any of you additionally want to volunteer for any of the many aspects of water quality protection, just call over to the office. And other than that, thank you very much for coming this morning.
Thanks, Jack. Good to know that there's stuff happening in our watershed. Next up, we're going to move over to Mirror Lake, and I'd like to introduce Larry Gill. He's a director at the Mirror Lake Protective Association. Larry worked for many years as a water quality professional at the Office of Environmental Affairs for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That's when I first met him back in the late 80s, and was very surprised to reconnect with him when we both ended up here. And he currently serves as the Conservation Commission, on the Conservation Commission for Tuftonboro. He's an active water sampler on Mirror Lake and runs their Lake Host program. So Larry, give us a little update on what's going on over in Mirror Lake. You can adjust this up and down. Just make sure you speak.
Well, we are here in summer. Some neighbors of mine walking along the road said, geez, this is about 2 weeks ago. When are we going to see a spring? I said, we don't have a spring in New Hampshire. We have mud season, and then we have the heat. So here we are. First slide, please. I'm going to work off of this slide for a little bit. So we have reworked this mission statement. We established, Mirror Lake Protective Association was established in 1991. And I have to commend those people for their foresight, because they really established the groundwork for what we do. And one of the things that they established, which I think all of us are very proud of, is a culture of stewardship. And the background, that is Mount Shaw, and that is one of the features of New Hampshire and also the world, one of the few ring dikes in all of the world that's still relatively pristine. So that's one of our views, and that's looking at from probably the Lake Coast side, from the Oak Hill side. So these are kind of our guiding principles: to protect the water quality and shoreline of Mirror Lake Drive, promote sound conservation land use management practice, preserve the integrity of the environment, and encourage environmentally safe recreation and increase the knowledge in the lake of the history of the lake. So in 2007, 2008, we saw our first cyanobacterial outbreaks. And then we got put on the dreaded 305B list. And in some ways, that was actually a benefit because we were then able to take advantage of the resources that both the state and the federal government have available to us to begin to address some of the issues that we have. So 2012, we contracted with Geosyntac Consultants, and they produced our management plan, which was 2012. And we actively implemented that plan from that period. And so last year, we celebrated our 30th anniversary as a Watershed Association. Next slide, please. So we have a active Lake Coast program. We've had so for, I think, since 2002. And this is one of our visitors. This is called a Chinese mystery snail. How it got that name, I don't know, but we have them. They're prolific. I cannot say that we have seen any really adverse influences from at this time, but they certainly do compete with our native mussels for some of the same food sources. But they are active. They get the size, the big ones get about the size of a golf ball or small tennis ball. So, and they are prolific. Next slide, please. Our buddy Don Kretschmer came into, as he mentioned, we called on him when we went through the COVID crisis. And we were not able to field a lake management program as was mentioned earlier. We just didn't have the volunteers. So Don provided us his expertise. He was all in the contract. We also got more water quality sampling during the winter months, which we had not done for quite a while. We only have sporadic information. So we have, since 1991, we've had probably about 30 years of water quality collections. We have one record of 1958 and maybe one in the early 1970s. So I think we've got a fairly decent database to look at and work on. Next slide, please. So this is the one that I want to focus. So Geosyntac identified phosphorus as our principal problem. No surprise to many of you. But they saw it as primarily an issue of phosphorus coming into the lake, and we have one primary source inflow, and that's from the Abenaki ski area. That stream runs across Wambeck Road and then eventually flows into Mirror Lake. And so that's the primary source of fresh water inflow water to Mirror Lake. We have some smaller streams, but they're all intermittent. And while they may have some issues with them, this is the dominant source. So we were charged with that management plan to implement any number of things, as was already expressed in terms of certainly doing the studies and looking at conservation lands, which I hope to talk to a little bit, and also do the monitoring, conserve land as much as we could, and then implement all of the programs between the state and New Hampshire UNH have available to us, and we've done that. So the first thing that Geosyntac said we needed to reduce our phosphorus. So the graph shows the green is the inlets, so you can see it's relatively high, but the long-term trend has been a decline. That's from about 2008 to about just before 2020. Similarly, we've got the deep spot. Our lake has one deep hole. The majority of Mirror Lake is relatively shallow. It's less than 15 feet deep. That hole is about 42 feet deep. So things gather there. And we have found through a number of studies, we've had been blessed with some thesis studies from UNH students, Amanda McQuaid, named one who's now working with Bob Craycraft at the Extension Service, and some other folks. Sabrina Perkins, I believe her name was, did a study. And so we've got a sense of what our cyanobacteria issues are, and they're primarily loading, internal loading. And we believe it is primarily the deep hole is that source. As you get the turnover, that gets up into the water column. So we believe we've seen a decline. And we believe that decline is, one, because we have been very adamant in implementing the management plan that we have. So that was 2012. We are now at 2022, and we are looking to update that plan. The issue that we have is still cyanobacteria. We are on the borderline between an oligotrophic and mesotrophic lake. That has pretty much stayed the same, but we believe we have addressed, at least to some degree, the reduction in inflow phosphorus coming into the lake. Next slide. I'm not sure, this came in, I think that this is European milfoil. Not sure of it. I would like to see a different way of it, but we don't have that. The only thing that we have are the Chinese mystery snails and a little bit of purple loosestrife running around. Next slide. This is the lake looking towards Lang Pond Road. From the opposite direction, Oak Hill is on your left-hand side. Lang Pond Road is a connected road from the Libby Museum and runs up to 109A. The major flow comes through that area. We cooperated with the town, both the towns of Wolfboro and Tuftonboro, sorry, and had portions of that paved. The reason we wanted to have paved is because periodically that road overtops with floodwater. So we wanted to get, we did not want to minimize the amount of washout of the phosphorus, and it's worked reasonably well. So we believe we've addressed that. Next slide, please. We have an active loon population. We generally have at least a pair of loons. The lake being about 320 to 370 acres doesn't really support multiple families of loons, but we almost always have one, and we have the prerequisite bald eagles that hassle them. But it's interesting because then you get to see, because there's one and the lake is relatively small, you get a chance to see a lot of the interactions with the babies and all the residents. There's a number of residents that actively kind of monitor them and build nests and yell at us when you get too close to the loons. So it works. Next slide. Fun with boats. That's kind of what it's all about. Our lakes, like most of us, most of the lakes here, have a mix of residents and people that are coming in, one, to enjoy what we have, and also to, as I think Dawn said, because they like to live here. And I think that's pretty much how we feel about this. We have an active weed watcher program. There's probably about a dozen folks that go out, and they have sectors that they routinely travel several times over the course of the summer. And so far, we have been able to keep all of the aquatic invasives out of the lake, and we would like to keep it that way. I think that's it. I'll take any questions later. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. If you have any questions for any of the speakers, just put them up here on this corner of the stage, and we're going to have a lengthy session for questions if we stay on schedule here. So next up, we're we're going to move over to Rust Pond, and Keith Simpson is going to talk about some of the issues and things that are going on over there. Keith is past president and officer of the Rust Pond Association, part of their water quality sampling team for 20 years. He and his wife Mary have kayaked, sailed, or skated on over 35 lakes and ponds in New Hampshire. I can attest to Keith's sailing prowess. I've watched him sail a lot, usually because I'm behind him. He's a hell of a sailor, and it's been fun to compete against him in the Lake Wentworth races over the years. So anyway, Keith, here you go.
Thanks, Don. I think everything you said about me is true, but I'm not sure completely, and I'm going to, like Russ Lanoy, put my hat on just to do a shameless plug for the Parks and Rec sailing program, which I'm the adult sailing instructor for. You can ask me, don't give him questions about that. You can ask me about that later. Quickly, a lot of people, I was talking to Russ before, don't know anything about Rust Pond. Here's a few factoids about Rust Pond. Its name is not because the water is rusty looking. No, it's because Colonel Henry B. Rust in the 17th century was one of the original proprietors of the town of Wolfboro, and was granted, or however they did it back then, 600 acres of land, including Rust Pond. And that's where the name Rust Pond comes from. Another factoid, it is, according to a 1870 committee report of the fisheries, Rust Pond was the first water body to be stocked with black bass in the state. Interesting factoid. The other thing about, I'll say about Rust Pond, by the way, it's a beautiful pond and no invasive species. So it's one of our prides that we have, kept our eyes open for such. That's to say, we don't. It's not that we don't have our problems, and we've been sampling, I think, as long as the VLAP Volunteer Lake Assessment Program has been going on back in the mid '80s. I've been personally involved in VLAP for at least 20 years. So we have a lot of data, which is a great thing. So we can track trends very easily. And then back at 2001, we embarked on a year-long intensive study, which involved sampling twice a month, all year long, and it took quite a few years, but the result was this report that we got in 2007. As I say, it took a while to get here. The irony of this kind of is that this was 2007. In 2006, some of you may remember we had a 100-year flood in the state, and we got socked just like anybody else. But even before that flood came, we had lots of evidence that there were issues going on in our pond. We can start with my first slide now. This is we are talking about what we on the Rust Pond called the North End mess. And this is a picture of the North End. Let's see, 1998. So that looks nice. There's a new house there. It looks pretty good. We can go on to the next slide, which is 2002. So this is before the flood. but this is basically in the same area, and you can see that there's silt. This is stuff that's washing in through a north inlet. And I'll have a little map in a second so I can point out to you where that is. I think we can go to the next slide. And this is the same area, and now you can see it's all filled in. You could even take a lawnmower in there and mow some of the lawn. We obviously, starting in 2001, we were working very closely with DES, not so much the town at that point, but at this point we started working with the town as well as DES to try to figure out ways to deal with the situation. And in 2013, let's go to the next slide, or if we can. There we go. Yeah, in 2013, we started to deal with this. Now here's to get you oriented. You may not all know, be familiar with this area. Okay. In case you didn't hear me, this is the area that I pictured, the north end. All of this affects the north end. Actually, the other problem that you don't see, this is a fraction, obviously, of Russ Pond, is Route 28 and what we were talking about, salt before. It's the one place that people can see Russ Pond for a split second as they're driving down Route 28, but it's also a place where salt, obviously. So that's yet another problem. I'm not going to talk about that problem. I'm just going to finish up here talking about what's going on in Area 7 here, and that we now, and I think that the major point of this is how long some of this can take. We only this spring, we finally had another report that has proven that the work that we did in 2013, basically in Area 8, which had huge gullies in it that were cut in. They were like 13 feet high that had been cut in. And right at where Crossroad meets, we had a catch basin built, and the erosion that further down in Area 8 and the beaver dams that were there were dealt with. Now there's a new beaver dam down at right where Area 7 and 8 meet, but part of how we're going to deal with that is to put a pipe in and leave the beaver dam there so that in heavy storm water runoff it will wash through. Anyway, this is an example of how long it takes, the different people, organizations that get involved, and that we are now looking at a possible end resolution for this, which our end resolution is to dredge some of that silt out that's in Area 7 in this, and kind of restore it. One of the main reasons is because the silt carries a great phosphorus load, and we'd like to mitigate that in any way that we can. So go ahead, move on. There's silt on Crossroad in one of the streams. These are pictures taken recently in the last year or so. Go ahead to the next picture, and we can skip again one more time. This is the catch basin on Crossroad that the town was involved in. Let's go one more. These are the recommendations by the firm that we hired along with the town. We're working on getting grant money for all of this. I'm not going to go through what these are, but you can, they're just, you know, things that can be done to get where we want to get. Last slide, I think. Bingo. The great news, one of the great news for me, this picture was taken from my house. That's my swim raft. And in the last couple of years, the same loon pair shows up every time. And one of them, presumably the female, always jumps up on the raft. The other one swims around. And there's been like 2 cases where we have actually seen the other loon jump up on the raft with this, and they did the nasty right in front of us. So this year, the great news is the Loon Preservation Society, we launched a nesting raft 4 days ago in Russ Pond. We're hoping that this loon pair discovers it and does their stuff there. And anyway, thank you all very much.
All right, thanks, Keith. So our next speaker is Art Slocum. He's going to talk on a little bit about Wolfboro Waters. So he's a board member of Moose Mountain Regional Greenways, Russ Pond Association, and Wolfboro-Tuftonboro Land Bank. Former member of the Conservation Commission in Wolfboro, longtime Wolfboro resident, and former manufacturer's rep for Lazy Boy. I think you'll see a theme with all of our speakers here. These are folks who are really engaged. They got their hands in everything, and these are really busy people, and I think I think they all deserve our appreciation and help. You know, when we can step up and volunteer, we should. So Art, take it away.
Good morning. I've been a Wolfboro resident for about 27 years, first on Sewell Road, and now I live on Russ Pond in South Wolfboro. And Keith, I don't know if he does this, but when people say, what's Russ Pond about? I say, well, it's not Golden Pond, it's Russ Pond. So, as Don said, I'm a member of several local conservation groups, and through my association with these volunteer groups, become aware of the potential threat to Wolfboro's most valuable asset, which is our water quality. Can you just stop for a minute and imagine the economic harm that could come to our beautiful town if our water quality was compromised in any way? This is the main reason that the Wolfboro Waters Committee was formed in a response to our first cyanobacteria outbreak in Winter Harbor in 2018. It's our role to advise the Board of Selectmen on water quality issues. As a committee of volunteer citizens, we were appointed by and report to the Wolfboro Board of Selectmen. It is our goal to take the necessary steps to head off potential harm caused by storm runoff in order to maintain our precious water quality. Wolfboro Public Works, headed by Dave Ford, has done a great job of identifying hotspots so that the work can be scheduled to make this possible. Wolfboro Waters approved 2 warrant articles, Wolfboro voters approved 2 warrant articles for a capital reserve fund of $100,000 to address stormwater and quality issues in our community. The Lake Winnipesaukee Association has entered into a memorandum of understanding with the town of Wolfboro to develop a water quality study of Wolfboro Bay and Back Bay to understand our current situation as it exists. Funding for the project will come from a $100,000 grant issued to the town of Wolfboro by the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. The Wolfboro Waters Committee and our town are partnering with the Lake Winnipesaukee Association on this effort. Our mission is to support and work with all the lake associations and to advocate for all the lakes and ponds in Wolfboro. Outreach activities have included the development of, number 1, Wolfboro Waters website. On our Town of Wolfboro website, you can find us at one word, wolfborowaters.org. Number 2, Wolfboro Waters Facebook page focusing on water quality issues, important quality updates, and educational materials. Number 3, a quarterly e-newsletter which offers Wolfboro water quality updates and educational materials. And if you haven't already, sign up for this at the table with Abby Adams in the back. Number 4, a brochure with educational information was mailed to all taxpayers. Number 5, work with the planning board to write new stormwater regulations. Support a restoration of Russ Pond's north end that was affected by storm damage. Number 7, sponsor and participate in the Wentworth Watershed Association Water Summit. I'm here. Check that one. Wolfboro Waters promotes water quality in our local lakes. Assessments have been conducted over the years, as you've heard, of Russ Pond, Mirror Lake, Lake Winnipesaukee, and by the respective lake associations. The assessments over the years by the Wentworth Watershed Association of Lake Wentworth and Crescent Lake were recently expanded to include Sergeant's Pond. Starting this year, Wolfboro Waters will be working with the Wolfboro Water Treatment Plant to include assessments of Upper Beach Pond, which is our drinking water. Wolfboro Waters has been doing a range of different additional types of sampling and analysis in Winter Harbor. The site of the cyano bloom, which I mentioned earlier, in an effort to figure out how to assess risks of future cyanobacteria blooms, and to prevent them. Working through the local lake associations, Wolfboro Waters is starting to determine the extent that the conditions and trends across our lakes are similar, as well as their cyanobacteria risk and mitigation strategies. It's our job to work with and supplement the work already being done by the various lake associations. Wolfboro Waters, as a town committee, is committed to preserving the quality of the lakes and ponds in our town. They are, after all, our most precious resources. The town has partnered with the Lake Winnipesaukee Association and has applied for a grant to pay for the Wolfboro Bay Watershed environmental study to determine the level of our water quality in Wolfboro Bay and Back Bay. So we are addressing both water quality and stormwater issues for the long-term future of our community. As we all know, Lake Winnipesaukee is the largest lake in our town. So with that, I would like to turn over the microphone to Bree Rossiter, representing the Lake Winnipesaukee Association, who will introduce you to the efforts being undertaken to preserve its water quality, most notably Wolfboro Bay Watershed Environmental Study. Thank you.
Everybody hear me okay? That's fine. Okay, thank you. Hi everybody, my name is Bree Rossiter and I'm the Conservation Program Manager for the Lake Winnipesaukee Association. A lot of you know my boss, Pat Tarpey. She's the Executive Director of LWA, and unfortunately she wasn't able to be here today, so I am her replacement. Next slide. As the Conservation Program Manager for the Lake Winnipesaukee Association, I lead several nutrient mitigation programs as part of our Keep Winnie Blue initiative. I assist in coordinating our water quality monitoring program. I help track cyanobacteria observations, and I also help to manage our Be Winnie Blue and Lake Smart program. I assist in tracking and implementing the BMP projects that have been identified in the watershed management plans, and I also serve on the assessment committee for Wolfboro Waters. So the Lake Winnipesaukee Association is the leading organization when it comes to protecting Lake Winnipesaukee and its watershed. We do this through monitoring, education, science, and restoration. This valuable resource is a natural haven with clear, beautiful water, natural sandy beaches, and recreational opportunities in all seasons. It's been a gathering place for friends and family for generations, and we're doing our best to make sure it stays that way for years to come. At LWA's request, last June in 2021, the Nelson A. Rockefeller Center for Public Policy at Dartmouth completed a study of the economic value of Lake Winnipesaukee. The study revealed that Lake Winnipesaukee makes significant contributions to the economy, specifically in real estate, tourism, and in utilities. So if we look at these numbers, and even if we remove the property assessment values, which could potentially be considered somewhat stagnant, the annual revenues that are generated from town taxes, tourism, and water supply total a little over $700 million. It's important to note that the study was by no means comprehensive, but continued investments in the upkeep and health of Lake Winnie are important to maintaining its contributions to the local, regional, and state economy. In looking at the lake and realizing the economic values associated, we ask ourselves, is the lake under threat? And the answer to this question is yes. Human impacts, such as stormwater runoff, bring excessive sediment and nutrient loading to the lake. So what are these economic impacts? A decline in water quality could impact recreation revenues, property values, and result in increased costs to address impairments. For example, the town of Moltenboro, has spent over $200,000 to treat milfoil annually. Next slide. The other aspect of this to consider is the ecological impacts from a decline in water quality. Ecological impacts from excessive nutrient loading and sediment will affect water clarity and water chemistry. This is not only a concern for our recreational activities, but is a potential stressor for the aquatic flora and fauna that call this lake home. So the big picture is, in reality, it's the ecology of the lake that drives the economy for this region. Therefore, any ecological impacts will potentially lead to economic impacts. We can take Lake Winnipesaukee as a local example. The increase in cyanobacterial blooms have created a cause for concern for residents and visitors to the lake, both in terms of the health risks and the economic impacts for potential renters and property owners. As a first step to be able to address this issue, the Lake Winnipesaukee Watershed Association residents have taken the lead to have a watershed management plan developed, and that is set to be completed by the end of this year. Next slide, please. We can take another larger example. Lake Champlain, which is 6 times the size of Winnipesaukee, has a horrendous problem with phosphorus loading. Property values have significantly declined, and the state of Vermont is actually under an EPA mandate to address these issues. The cost of trying to manage this comes out to nearly $48 million per year, or $970 million over the next 20 years. And the state is looking at increasing property taxes to help be able to cover these costs. So we know that phosphorus loading in Winnie has increased 300% from natural background levels. And all of us have seen changes in the lake. You know, the increasing amounts of algae, the amount of slime on the rocks, and the nuisance of invasive milfoil, among other issues. One important fact to note is that 1 pound of phosphorus can support 500 pounds of algal and plant growth. So, water quality and watershed analyses are completed to be able to determine the amount of nutrient loading that's coming into the lake, both from in and off the land, and how well the lake can assimilate or process that load. So these analyses help us to have a better understanding of the situation at hand and also to be able to target priority areas. This map on the right is from the Moltenboro Bay and Winter Harbor Watershed Management Plan, and it shows the phosphorus load per unit area for each catchment in kilograms per hectare per year in these 2 watersheds. So I know it's a little bit hard to see, but the boundary with the pink is Winter Harbor Watershed, and the larger black boundary is for Moltenboro Bay. The areas that are in orange are the priority areas. Developed watersheds contribute 5 to 10 times the amount of phosphorus and nutrients than forested watersheds. This is because human activities such as agriculture, construction, transportation, or just choosing what to do with your lawn cause more loading. Ultimately, more loading means faster eutrophication. And just like us, lakes age over time, so the eutrophication is the process of increased productivity as a lake ages. So these watershed and water quality analyses result in watershed management plans. These management plans are a tool to be able to guide community and individual actions with the ultimate goal of reducing pollutant loading to the lake. The plans result in action plans where communities can move forward with implementation of these projects. It's really important to note that 319 grant funding for implementation is not available without an EPA-approved watershed management plan. So far, to date, plans have been completed for 6 out of 10 sub-watersheds in Lake Winnipesaukee. And the reason that we tackle these plans at a sub-watershed approach is for a variety of reasons. The first is the size and morphology of Lake Winnipesaukee. This means that each embayment has differing characteristics and influences, which means that we need to tackle them separately. To date, we've identified over 450 recommendations in these plans, including both non-structural type and structural type projects targeting education, wastewater, land conservation, as well as municipal ordinances and regulations, and then structural recommendations, or BMPs, best management practices as well. So to date, we have raised over $500,000 through grants and in-kind match to be able to develop these plans. The map on the right, The map on the right in green shows where plans have been completed, and then that kind of salmony orange color is where plans have yet to be completed. So like I mentioned, next slide please. Like I mentioned before, watershed management plans are a collaborative effort between towns, residents, and state agencies to be able to create an action plan with measurable goals and outcomes. The 7 steps that are highlighted on this slide are an explanation of the phases that are taken to complete these plans, which usually take between 1 to 2 years just to develop. Wolfboro is in the process of applying to the Department of Environmental Services for a $100,000 grant to do this project, and like Art said, is going to be contracting with LWA as a project manager. So what happens next? LWA is going to hire an environmental consultant to be able to conduct the study. They'll do some field assessments and surveys to be able to document existing conditions. Pollutant loads are going to be estimated from existing land use and combined with water quality data analyses to be able to set water quality goals for Wolfboro Bay and Back Bay. Educational outreach is going to be done to be able to enhance public understanding and also to increase participation on an ongoing basis even after the plan is published. The start date for this is really dependent upon when the project is approved by New Hampshire Governor and Council. Hopefully we can begin planning by this fall, and as I mentioned before, it's going to take about 1 to 2 years to complete. So these management plans result in action plans, and the goal of this is to be able to identify and prioritize mitigation sites which are represented on this map. This map is by no means comprehensive. It doesn't show the sites that have been done on Mirror Lake, Lake Wentworth, or Mary Meeting River and Alton. And in addition, these sites only represent public property as we can't go on private property to conduct any of these field surveys. The estimated cost for these 250 restoration sites is over $2.5 million. Over 40 projects have been completed to date, and that results in a load reduction of 114 pounds of total phosphorus per year and 64,800 pounds of total suspended solids. The actual load reduction achieved to date is much greater than this because, as I said, it only reflects the projects that LWA has been involved in. This map also doesn't include some of the projects that towns have completed. For example, Wolfboro's received 319 funds to do some stormwater improvements. And the financial numbers don't include the work that Dave Ford's done for stormwater management, like I said. An example is the project that was done in Cary Beach, which was identified in the Moltenboro Bay and Winter Harbor Watershed Management Plan. Next slide. So we have actually been awarded a 319 grant to be able to complete some projects in Tuftonboro and Wolfboro. The construction of these BMPs for the top 3 sites that were identified in the Moltenboro Bay Watershed Management Plan is going to result in a nutrient load reduction of 28,000 pounds of total suspended solids and 13 pounds of TP annually to Moltenboro Bay. An important piece of this to consider is that in completing these projects, we're going to achieve 32% of the targeted phosphorus goal, which is 41.2 pounds of TP per year that was set in the Watershed Management Plan. This grant is also going to include the development of some conceptual designs and final bid packages for the replacement of driveway culverts along White Gate Lane and the permanent stabilization of 3 existing drainage channels. This grant is only covering the costs to develop the designs, but it doesn't include the cost of construction or installation. Future construction of these BMPs is going to reduce that sediment and nutrient loading to Winter Harbor by an estimated 3,400 pounds per year of total suspended solids. Overall, the main goal to take away from this is everything that we're doing is cumulatively adding up and taking that much more sediment and TP away from the lake every year. So what can you do to help? I know this is probably a little bit of a reiteration, but you can do your part by trying to minimize the amount of phosphorus that you may be contributing to the lake. Even if you don't have a waterfront property, everything that happens in the watershed stays in the watershed. You can use phosphate-free cleaning products, and we recommend not fertilizing your lawn. Some other lake-friendly practices that you could consider without the use of any harmful chemicals include aerating and dethatching your lawn, leaving the leaves, which can actually act as a natural mulch to help suppress weeds and fertilize your soil. You can add vegetation to your shorefront. You know, we like to think of that as the last line of defense before it gets to the lake. This is going to help filter any runoff prior to it entering the lake. If you're interested in learning more about what you can do on your property, you can sign up for a Be Winnie Blue and Lake Smart assessment on our website. This is a free, non-regulatory service that we established in partnership with New Hampshire Lakes, and it'll provide you with some property-specific recommendations to do your part to keep Winnie blue. Lastly, I encourage you to join your local lake associations. These organizations are instrumental in protecting and sustaining the lakes that you love, and they rely on memberships and donations to carry out their important work. Your participation can help build a sense of community, friendship, and understanding of how to protect the valuable natural resources that we all enjoy. That's it.
Thanks, Bree. Okay, so now we're getting to the fun part here, the questions. If you have questions for these speakers, I didn't see any come up here. Bring them on up, and we'll try to get to them. So I'm going to use the moderator's prerogative here and pose a question to each of the panelists, and I'm going to give you time to think about it, which is really rare. So I want each of you to think about what the #1 issue is in your watershed or your jurisdiction related to water quality, and I only want like 1 or 2 words. And I may cut you off otherwise. And we're going to come back to that because I'm going to give the first question to Ted.
Make sure when you're answering questions you speak into the mic, otherwise people at home can't hear you, so it has to be into the mic.
Right. So first question is to Ted, while everyone else is thinking. All right, so Ted, is it true that salt never goes away or dissipates?
Salt is like diamonds, it's forever. So it's conservative. It does, I mean, to some extent, the solution to pollution is dilution. So, you know, it does get diluted and it does eventually sort of work its way out. But remember that the salt goes into groundwater. The groundwater takes a long time to get to the surface water. So the salt content we see today is a reflection of the land use patterns over the last 20 to 30 years. And the salt, what we do today, will impact what the levels look like in 20 to 30 years.
Yep, Great answers. Here's a follow-on question. Are the current chloride standards low enough?
No, probably not. There's an effort right now to look at chloride standards, and the way that they're going to look at it is through multiple ions. And that probably doesn't matter for New Hampshire because we don't really have a lot of other ions. But it's very likely, given the research that's gone on mussels in particular, that we will see the standard for chlorides drop dramatically, and which will mean we'll have lots more impaired water bodies.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Ted. Next question is for Russ. If you can pass the mic down.
Yep.
Does construction of a proper gravel road require complete removal of the existing road?
It used to. Since the development of geotextiles, it doesn't. The railroad started using geotextiles many years ago. The first time I ever heard of it being used was through the New Hampshire Road Agents Association newsletters, I think in 1992 in Temple. They did it, and I've used it in many places since, and most of your contractors are beginning to use it now. I happen to live on the border between Madison and Conway. Both roads were rebuilt at the same time, and I'm watching closely to see what's going on in Madison versus Conway. Madison has a culvert every now and then. Conway has sewer, water, and drainage, and that road is holding up better than the $40,000 worth of gravel that got put on the Madison Road with no geotextile. Put down geotextile over a swamp is what they tell me. I haven't tried it yet. I don't plan to, for many reasons. And you put your gravel over it, and you've got a road. It keeps the geotextile keeps the gravel on the top from working down into the base. So the answer to the question is no.
Okay, I'm going to give you, while you have the mic, I'm going to give you another one.
Uh-oh.
Is it important to keep grass growing in ditches to slow water and stabilize the ditch?
The rule,
at least where you can, I guess I'm going to add that
okay.
on there.
The rule with ditches, as Dave Weathers has told me, who was the tech for the NRCS for years, grass, if that doesn't hold, you put in rocks. If those don't hold, you put in bigger rocks. Essentially.
Yep. Oh, that's a great answer. Okay, so now we're going to go back to the other question that I already posed. And if you can just go down the line, start with Larry, I guess, pass the mic. This the biggest water quality issue that you see in your jurisdiction, we'll call it.
Phosphorus.
All right.
Cyanobacterial outbreaks.
We need to study the Wolfboro Bay watershed and Back Bay and complete it just as a benchmark to see where we are, and then do some steps to fix that and find the sources of pollution.
Great. Keith?
Well, for Russ Pond, I was fairly convinced that this was a problem, but after today, I'm absolutely convinced that the runoff from Route 28 and the salt is probably the biggest issue in the long run for Russ Pond.
This is my personal opinion, obviously, and here in Wolfboro for the WWA, I see a lot of really dedicated people that are focused on a lot of the specific problems that we've talked about today. So I guess I would say the biggest problem I see is the continued education of everyone around the lake in getting the word out.
Yep. Great. Bree?
My answer to the question is excessive phosphorus and sediment associated with human influences.
Great. Ted? You don't have to answer.
Well,
I have another question
just
for
from
you.
a statewide perspective, of all the impairments that we have in water quality, something like 95% of them are related to runoff from developed areas. So it's really, hands down, that is the reason why we have water quality problems in the state.
Okay, great. Okay, the next one's for Keith. Yep.
You may have to help me with this.
What can be done or what is being done to create public access to Rust Pond? You may or may not know the answer to that.
Actually, you're on the board. Maybe we should take this.
All right.
It's been an issue for the last year and a half, 2 years, and the Russ Pond Association Board, which I'm a member of, is working to try to encourage a private owner on the lake to allow access, even if it's on a one-year temporary basis. And we are currently pursuing that to get that done.
Okay, great. This one goes back to Ted. And Bree, you may have something to add to this, I'm not sure, since you have the biggest watershed that you're representing here. How can people who are not waterfront property owners live up at the upper end of the watershed, affect lake quality, and help protect lakes?
Yeah, I think Bree covered that really, really well. In fact, I'm going to let her answer that question.
All right, perfect.
Because her response was more eloquent than mine would have been. So.
Can you repeat the second part?
Yep. Yeah, so how do people who are in the watershed but not direct lakefront affect lake quality and help protect lakes?
So anything that happens in the watershed stays in the watershed. So anything that any property owner in the watershed, even if you're not waterfront, can do to be able to minimize loading into the lake is going to be beneficial.
Great. Thank you. All right, next one's for Russ. We're going to come all the way back over here. Okay, this one says, our neighborhood uses crushed asphalt for road maintenance. Is this good? Does it drain water?
It's in the book.
A shameless plug.
I've used it. It's on, the book is online. I've used it. A lot of people like it. Remember that asphalt comes out of the plant at 375 degrees. It goes down to 275 degrees. The binder that holds it together is the asphalt, so there is no binder in it beyond the asphalt. And even with global warming, I don't think we're going to reach 275 degrees. Well, and if we do, this is all a moot point. So, and the other thing I've noticed about it is it tends to be much more dusty because although water is the enemy of the road, moisture, a certain amount of moisture in the road is critical to keeping the road together. And what I have seen with recycled asphalt, it's the dustiest thing going because it doesn't, you pour water on it, you can see the water run right off because the aggregate is still coated. And I want to speak for the Big P Porridge Pond, which is entirely in the town of Madison where I live on the border of Conway, and we have two major developments on that. And I'm working with the organization Rock House to try and reduce the amount of runoff from that because there's a wetland area that was just sold by the fellow who used to be chair of the New Hampshire Wetlands Committee. Thousands of tons of sediment in that wetland. The Big P Porridge Preservation Association is now a 501c3, so we are going to be able to receive grants, working with Forrest Bell, I believe, in getting our ducks in a row, as it were. And we've got both towns on our side now, so things are beginning to happen there.
Good. Okay. Ted, you're not getting off the hook. So.
You should sit closer.
Can I just say that I went to the public hearing in the legislature this session on Big P Porridge Pond, and it really sounded like a child's riddle. Like a nursery rhyme. How many times people had to say Big Peach Porridge Pond, and it was actually really humorous.
Okay, Ted. So this one won't be so bad. Is the state of New Hampshire Public Works and Highway Department in favor of the green program, the green salt program, and shifting to less salt on roads?
Great question. So I had a conversation earlier with a couple of people here that DOT has largely kept its salt use relatively constant or has declined over time. And the places where they're using brine are the places where they have reduced their salt. So one of the key messages for you all is that DOT is slowly expanding its brine use around the state. It started in the I-93 corridor, the I-95 corridor. They're starting to get to 89 now. So I think this is one of the things that they need to hear from you all, is that you'd like to see that, and you'd like to see pressure put on from your elected officials to have more availability of brine for DOT's and for public works. It's also challenging for public works to get into that business because it is expensive. We are about to launch, we have a new law that came in a couple years ago, that will allow us to launch a new municipal green snow pro program. And so we're going to be rolling that out over the next year, and we're really going to be encouraging towns to go ahead and get certified. And one of the things that we've heard from especially lake communities, people like Lake Sunapee and some at Lake Cobbetts Pond, Canopy Lake, is that they would really like to encourage their municipalities to become Green Snow Pro certified. And the way we're going to set this up is it's going to have several layers. So you can be a basic or an advanced or an expert level in municipal salt management. And so I think that's going to be a way for both the communities to have a tool to be able to recognize their good work, and a way for folks like yourself to be able to communicate that with your boards of selectmen and your DPWs to say, this is what we would like. We would like you to work towards this. And I think it's going to be an important tool for everybody.
Oh, great. No, I think that's good info. Here's another question. How do water chloride levels affect cyanobacterial growth? Inhibitory or stimulatory?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. This is something that's being researched right now. There are, the cyanobacteria, the more I learn about it, the less I think I know about it, because it's weird, wacky stuff. And so what we know is that it sometimes is nitrogen related, sometimes it's phosphorus related, sometimes it's the combination of the two of them that's related. Salt also does funny things in water. So, if it's pushing, for example, I gave the example of a spring freshet in which that makes the water sort of with all the pollutants in it float. So it's floating out into a deeper part of the lake and then dropping in. So that can put your phosphorus directly into the deepest parts of your lake. That then stimulates cyanobacteria. So it isn't necessarily one is exactly causing the other. The other thing that is really, we don't know a lot about, but if you do the math, it could be significant, is that, rock salt is 96 to 97% pure rock salt. But what's in the other 3 to 4%? And if we're putting down millions of tons, we are putting millions of tons down as a state. Millions of tons times 3 or 4% is a lot of tons. So whatever is in the rest of that stuff, which is metals, it's all kinds of things. It could be nutrients. There's lots of things, impurities, which are in that salt that no one is really talking about.
Right. Now that's good information. I'll just add a little bit. I think that to the extent that chloride has toxic properties of itself, to the extent that unravels our streams and makes our streams not function properly and makes the lakes not function properly, which is something that Ted alluded to. Cyanobacteria love to come in a vacuum like that, where something is disrupted, the streams are not absorbing phosphorus like they should because the chloride has degraded the streams. That phosphorus ends up in the lake and can grow then cyanobacteria. So, the extent that we can keep a healthy, intact ecosystem in the streams and in the lakes, that's to the benefit of natural forms of algae, or should I say more desirable forms of algae than cyanobacteria. Okay, I think I'm out of questions here. Does anybody have any compelling questions that we've missed here? There's one question that's probably a little bit more than we can handle here. We'll try to address that on the Wentworth Watershed site. I'll write something up and we'll post it. And I think we've gotten all the rest of the questions out of the way. Anything else? Anybody else have any parting words here? Anything we missed? Okay, Russ wants to remind you to go to the Wentworth Watershed table and sign up for the gravel road workshop. I'm going to acknowledge all of our underwriters, Wolfboro Fund, Kevin Lawler at Edward Jones, Wolfboro Waters Committee, Krutoff family, DF Richard Energy, Kevin Lawler of Lake Winnipesaukee Association of Edward Jones, Mirror Lake Protective Association, New Hampshire Boat Museum, Rust Pond, Wolfboro Fund, Wolfboro Waters Committee, and the dive team and the weed watchers. I also want to acknowledge our tech guy up above, Axel, and Celia, who somehow kept the microphones going even though they didn't want to. And everybody who's manning the tables and did the check-in and everything else. There's a lot of work that happened behind the scenes here that to pull this off. And I'd like to acknowledge all of them. Yeah. So I wasn't kidding. Grab a sandwich, grab some food for your way out the door, and have a picnic. Right. Hey, we got out of here on time, or even a little early, so that's great. Thanks, guys.